This week on Jerusalem Dateline, evangelical Christian leaders meet Saudi leaders on the eve of the 9/11 anniversary. Plus, Netanyahu riles the Arab world with a campaign pledge to annex the Jordan Valley. And we ask Israeli voters in Tel Aviv who they'll choose. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl, filling in for Chris Mitchell. For the second time in less than a year, a delegation of U.S. evangelical Christian leaders accepted an invitation to visit Saudi Arabia and its leaders. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jeddah, the visit marked one more step in a growing relationship between U.S. evangelicals and the Sunni Arab leaders of the Middle East.
The visit certainly made the national news here.
To see every newspaper in this country have evangelicals above the fold, not hiding our visit, but celebrating our visit, this is, to put it mildly, this is historic.
The delegation met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman on the eve of the anniversary of 9/11. To some, it may seem like an unlikely time, but the leader of the delegation, Joel Rosenberg, said there was a purpose behind the timing.
The Saudi Arabia of 18 years ago, the Saudi Arabia that, out of which Osama bin Laden came, Al-Qaeda, and the radical theology of violent jihad, that Saudi Arabia doesn't exist anymore. They have made sweeping changes that most Americans, most Christians aren't aware of.
I was profoundly astounded of how much freedoms are being given to women here.
We talk about veiled women, women under the veil, and the country under the veil. And I think there's a veil over people's perceptions in the West. There's a misunderstanding.
Many in the West see the Crown Prince and Saudi Arabia through a prism, including the murder investigation of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. While not dismissing the crime, Rosenberg and the delegation felt it important to be in the room with a voice.
The opportunity to be in the room and build a relationship means you can also ask hard questions. You can ask direct questions. You can engage on human rights issues, religious freedom issues. How can you affect it if you don't have an opportunity to talk to the top leaders?
Nothing was hidden. Nothing was off the table in terms of discussion.
Larry Ross served as Billy Graham's spokesman for more than 3 decades.
I think Mr. Graham was a good example of how speaking truth to power and getting accomplished a lot more personally, privately, than you can making bold public statements, critical statements.
To America, I would say that Saudi Arabia is a strong country, very interested in building stronger and stronger relationships with the people in the United States, with the government of the United States.
Only 2 U.S. senators have visited Saudi Arabia in the past year. Rosenberg and the delegation hope other U.S. leaders will seek to meet the country's leaders face to face and see firsthand a sometimes unknown story. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
Both President Trump and Israel have dismissed a report on the Politico website that Israel was spying on the U.S. The report accused Israel of planting cell phone surveillance devices that were found near the White House and other sensitive locations around Washington.
I don't believe that. No, I don't think the Israelis were spying on us. I really would find that hard to believe. My relationship with Israel has been great.
I have a report. No intelligence collection in the United States. No spying. And it's rigorously enforced without any exception.
The report comes just days before Israelis vote in national elections, which some have called a referendum on Netanyahu. Netanyahu often highlights his close ties with Trump. Just a week before Israeli elections, Netanyahu pressed forward in his battle against Iran's nuclear development with a new revelation. Prime Minister Netanyahu revealed what he called a second Iranian atomic warehouse at a press conference in Jerusalem.
Today we reveal that yet another secret nuclear site was exposed in the archives that we brought from Tehran. In this site, Iran conducted experiments to develop nuclear weapons. This is the site near Abadeh, south of Isfahan. When Iran realized that we uncovered this site, here's what they did. They destroyed the site.
Netanyahu pointed to before and after pictures and said Iran tried to destroy the evidence after they knew Israel was on to them.
This is what I have to say to the tyrants of Tehran. Israel knows what you're doing, Israel knows when you're doing it, and Israel knows where you're doing it. We will continue to expose your lies. What we see is a consistent pattern of Iranian lies, deception, and violations.
Last year, Netanyahu revealed that Israel's Mossad had discovered and smuggled back to Israel an Iranian nuclear archive. Later at the UN, he also exposed what he called a secret atomic warehouse located in a Tehran neighborhood.
I call on the international community to wake up, to realize that Iran is systematically lying, and I call on the international community to join President Trump's sanctions to exert more pressure on Iran. The only way to stop Iran's march to the bomb and its aggression in the region is pressure, pressure, and more pressure.
Iran's foreign minister Javad Zarif denied the accusation and accused Netanyahu of trying to start a war. He tweeted, "The possessor of real nukes cries wolf," on an alleged demolished site in Iran. The revelation comes at a time of heightened tensions between Iran and the international community over its nuclear program. The International Atomic Energy Agency announced earlier this week that it had found traces of uranium at the first atomic warehouse that Netanyahu identified last year. It also comes as campaigning intensifies ahead of Israel's elections. Netanyahu's critics say he's using national security to campaign, but it's clear that whoever Israel's next prime minister will be, he'll have to deal with the growing threat of Iran. The day after his Iranian revelation, Netanyahu riled the United Nations, Arab League, and others with a campaign pledge to annex part of biblical Judea and Samaria. The move comes ahead of the rollout of President Trump's peace plan. In a campaign speech to his Likud party, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu promised to annex the Jordan Valley and the northern part of the Dead Sea.
Today, I'm announcing my intention to apply, with the formation of the next government, Israeli sovereignty on the Jordan Valley and northern Dead Sea.
The Palestinian Authority considers this area to be part of the West Bank, where it wants to establish a future state. Netanyahu also has plans for Israeli communities throughout the rest of Judea and Samaria.
This is a historic opportunity, a one-time opportunity to extend Israeli sovereignty on our settlements in Judea and Samaria, and also on other important regions for our security, for our heritage, and for our future.
President Trump is expected to roll out his Israeli-Palestinian deal of the century after the elections.
Out of respect for President Trump and out of great trust in our friendship, I will wait to impose Israeli sovereignty over all the settlements until after the presentation of the president's diplomatic plan.
The United Nations said unilateral actions would not be helpful to the peace process.
Such a prospect would be devastating to the potential of reviving negotiations, regional peace, and the very essence of a two-state solution.
Saudi Arabia condemned the move as a serious escalation, and the Arab League held an emergency meeting.
The Council is considering this announcement a serious development and a new Israeli aggression through its intention to violate international law, the UN Charter, and the concerned resolutions of the international legitimacy.
During his speech, security guards whisked Netanyahu out of the room after sirens sounded when terrorists in Gaza launched 2 rockets at Ashkelon and Ashdod, where he was speaking. Netanyahu later returned to finish his speech. Meanwhile, Israelis have a few more days to decide which one of the more than 30 political parties they'll vote for.
I'm not sure yet about which I'm going to decide, but for now it seems like I'm going to go with blue and white.
Only Bibi. We have a saying here. Only Bibi.
Polls show that the Likud and the blue and white party of Benny Gantz are virtually tied for first place. Following the election, the hard part begins, when the winner works to pull together parties to form a coalition government. Coming up, what does the Bible say about the West Bank? As we heard, Netanyahu's pledge to annex areas the Palestinian Authority wants for a future state created an uproar. On the ground, it's a complicated situation. But politics aside, here's a story we did a number of years ago about what the Bible says about the West Bank.
Most of the world calls it the West Bank, but the Bible gave it a different name.
We find it in the Bible that it's not called the West Bank, although it is on the west bank of the Jordan. We know it as Judea and Samaria.
On the hills of Judea, Samaria, the Jewish people were born, and that's where it all started. That's where Abraham walked, that's where Isaac and Jacob lived, that's where Jacob slept and had his famous dream.
This is the modern-day community of Bethel, named after biblical Bethel, the house of God. It may not look ancient, but here, 4,000 years ago, the Bible says God appeared to Jacob and promised this land to him and his descendants forever.
Jordan took over the West Bank following the 1948 Israeli-Arab War. About 20 years later, Israel regained control during the 1967 Six-Day War. 1.6 million Palestinians and 350,000 Israeli Jews live here. Now this area, known as Israel's biblical heartland, could be the future Palestinian state. This is Highway 60, the main West Bank thoroughfare for both Israelis and Palestinian Arabs. But Dean Bai says it's much more.
It's probably one of the most amazing roads in all of history because God met with his patriarchs. He met with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He covenanted this land there. Along this road, Jesus met with a Samaritan woman. It's along this road that he declared to her who he was.
Some biblical highlights along this road are present-day Jewish communities. They include Jerusalem and Shiloh, home of the first Jewish tabernacle. This Israeli park is near Anatot. According to the Bible, this is where God told Jeremiah to buy a piece of land and bury the deed in a clay pot as a sign the Jewish people would return to the land.
He says, I want you to buy from your uncle a piece of land in Anathoth, and would you do it up legally with a seal and a deed and a title, and would you put it in a clay pot so it will last a long time?
Despite the significance, you won't see many visitors. That's because many West Bank cities are under Palestinian Arab control. In fact, the only controlled areas frequented by tourists are Bethlehem and Jericho, the oldest city in the world. Other sites under dispute include Rachel's tomb in Bethlehem and the cave of the patriarchs in Hebron, where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their wives are buried. While some Israelis would be willing to swap Judea, Samaria, and this biblical heritage for peace, Naftali Bennett objects.
The source of the Bible is here. If, God forbid, we uproot ourselves, there will never be peace. They'll say, man, these Jews don't feel any connection, so how about just wiping them out of this country altogether? If we're not in Jerusalem, if we're not in Hebron, if we're not in Bethel, we won't be in Tel Aviv.
Bai says it's up to Christians to take the side of God.
I think God's plan and his purposes was that Israel would allow the stranger to dwell here, but he's given this inheritance to Israel. He's given this to Israel to be the steward of this land. At least we can do is respect God's choosing.
Up next, the story of how a tiny nation took on its enemies and became a formidable military power. When Israel's enemies began shooting missiles into the Jewish state, Israel developed a system that's the equivalent of a bullet hitting a bullet. That's just one example of how Israel became a world leader in developing state-of-the-art weapons. Here's the story of how a tiny nation of 8 million became a global military superpower.
When it comes to state-of-the-art weapons,
the Israeli military has succeeded in such a short time, in under 70 years, in establishing what's the most formidable, powerful militaries in the world. And possibly the most innovative military in the world.
Jerusalem Post editor-in-chief Yaakov Kass co-wrote The Weapon Wizards, How Israel Became a High-Tech Military Superpower.
Israel is at the forefront of missile defense technology, whether it's the Arrow or the Iron Dome, which everyone is familiar with. Israel is a world leader in drone technology. Israel builds its own tanks. Israel is leading in cyber warfare. Where did all of this come from? How did such a tiny little country in such a short amount of time manage to achieve such great success?
Katz says one reason Israel achieved this level of success is simply survival. 70 years ago, 5 Arab nations attacked Israel the day it was born, a country with only one natural resource.
What was the one natural resource that Israel had? The Jewish brain. And those brains were what was used to be able to survive. So when you have this amazing recipe of threat, of this threat matrix, of your back up against the wall, you have no choice but to use the one thing you have, which is your brain, and you have to innovate.
And Israel did just that. Case in point, Israel's anti-missile defense system. The Iron Dome has shot down hundreds of rockets fired out of Gaza behind me into Israel.
That's how Israel said, 1 second, we're facing missiles that are coming at us from Iraq, from Syria, from Gaza. We have to come up with a system that doesn't exist in today's world. And that's how they came up with the Arrow, which can intercept ballistic missiles, and with David's Sling, which can intercept medium-range missiles, and with Iron Dome, which can intercept and is proven to intercept over 85% of the missiles that are fired from the Gaza Strip. And that's how Israel has developed this amazing technology that's still highly classified to detect the tunnels that Hamas is digging under the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip, a technology that exists nowhere else in the world.
Not all of Israel's power comes from high-tech products. It also includes its people, especially how the army produces a culture of independence.
We all think about the United States Army. Everyone's dressed in their uniforms, right? People take things very seriously. Everyone's saluting, sir, ma'am, all these terms. Israel's completely different. The ranks that you carry on your shoulder are meaningless to the in-between soldiers. That enables free thinking. It allows the chief of staff to speak with a low grunt soldier and be able to talk about things. And when you can talk about things, when you can have that free flow of information and ideas, you can create, you can innovate. People aren't afraid to speak their minds. That's a huge advantage of national proportion that I think you'll find nowhere else in the world but here.
While the U.S. provides major weapon systems to Israel, America's military also benefits from the real-life testing of its equipment.
One of the things that the U.S. benefits from is that Israel is the first country that has operational F-35s today.
Katz says while Israel has shared a friendship with America, along the way, it's also had a helping hand from above.
I'm a believer myself, and I think that it can't just be that it's all on its own, right? The hand of God, I think we see here almost daily in this country, in this region. The ingenuity, the entrepreneurship, the innovation is incredible. But there's that hand behind us that is pushing us along the way.
Katz agrees weapons, technology, and innovation are the centerpieces of his book, but there's more to the overall story.
Yes, it's about weapons, but it's also a story about, it's the tale of Israel. It's a story of an ancient people that returned to their historic homeland and against all odds, not just survived, but persevered. And that is the story of the state of Israel.
Still ahead, we take you to Tel Aviv to hear what Israeli voters there are saying. Just ahead of Israeli elections, we went to Tel Aviv to find out what voters there had to say. Many said they'd choose the Kahol Lavan, or in English, Blue and White Party. That's led by Benny Gantz, a former IDF chief of staff. According to one poll, the Blue and White Party pulled ahead of Netanyahu's Likud party, but another poll put Likud ahead of Blue and White. Both, however, showed a larger right-wing bloc. Many Israelis are undecided about who they'll vote for, but here's what some had to say. Who do you want to win in the upcoming elections?
I guess that I want to see Gantz as the next Prime Minister of Israel. I think that the current situation is not so well for us, politically, globally.
We don't know who to choose for. I think that I will go for Gantz, but
I don't know, maybe Gantz or Lieberman. Everyone except Bibi. He's a bit corrupted and he's too long leading this country.
Just Kahol Lavan. Bibi, it's not good. Bibi, it's bad.
Democratic Party, which is Meretz party. That's very soft left wing in Israel.
Shirley, who are you going to vote for in the upcoming election?
For Bibi, I think he's the man. He's a leader for our country. Yeah, I'm sure of it.
Only Bibi. We have a saying here. Only Bibi. I really don't think that anyone else can take Israel to better places right now.
For now, it seems like I'm going to go with blue and white party.
You can't vote in the elections, but who would you vote for if you could?
If I have the opportunity, I'll vote for Bibi.
Why?
No. He's a good man. He's very good because I've been here for maybe for 2 years and now. The security in Israel, everything in Israel is good.
Benny Gantz.
Why?
Because I'm tired of the corruption and it's time for a change. And I think that he's a straight man. Yes, he lacks for experience, but he's great and he's relaxed. And I want to be relaxed. We are in Israel, Tel Aviv, and we like our freedom.
Meretz.
Why?
Because their social and economical agenda is generally what I'm for.
I would say Kahol Lavan party.
Why?
I think that when you talk about the prime minister that have problems, like allegation against him, everything else would be fine by me. It's a good party. They have good meanings. I believe in them. I just need the change. We just need some sort of refreshment to this country.
That's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And remember to pray for the Israelis as they go to vote in this decisive election. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.